This is the part 2 of our cloud networks and databases workshop, and it's actually the workshop 3. So mm, we'll continue from what we stopped last week. So we created a VPC for our cloud network, and we created two subnets. One we called public, the other private. So these were the side ranges that we assigned to them. And we encountered an issue last week. So actually, you shouldn't have encountered that if you continued. But I had an issue, so I fixed that, and we will continue today from there. Let me take you to my console. Do you see my console screen now?
Yep.
Okay. So last time, this is where we stopped after creating the subnets. And now one thing I forgot to mention, that day when you initially create your the AWS account, you will get what you call the default VPC, right? So this is the default VPC that I originally had, and I have created two VPCs with me. So I'm going to use this VPC2 for my work today. And even subnets, you get several subnets as default when you initially open your AWS account, but we are not going to use them. We are going to use our own customized subnets. So this is where we stopped after creating the private and public subnets. And the next step was to uh, detach our internet gateway from the default VPC and attach that to the custom VPC. So what I'm going to do now, as I told you other day, internet gateway helps us to traffic route between internet and our internal network. So currently it supports our default VPC, default network, but we want to remove that. We want to detach that from that. So it is currently connected to the default one. So you guys can follow me, right? You all have logged into the console and in the screen. So I'm going to detach from this VPC, right? So it says detach successfully. Now I'm going to attach this to a VPC. So here I can select the VPC, and this is the custom VPC that I want to attach this internet gateway to. So I select that and I say attach internet gateway. And then uh, in the slides, I have another thing that you want to enable. This is required actually for to set up your database properly. So I'm going to do this step as well. Enable DNS host names for custom VPC. So I go back to my VPC screen. I select this custom VPC, and I go to edit DNS host names. So there I can enable this, right? Now we are done with what we need to set up in this VPC service. Okay, if I'm fast, or if you want me to slow down, or if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. So next we have to go to the database, I think. Right, no. Actually, I gave you an introduction last time about security groups. Okay. They are kind of like firewall in cloud networks, and they are stateless. So if inbound is allowed, you cannot restrict outbound. So that means if you open up a port for inbound traffic, you cannot control that port to outbound traffic. So, and the other way, you can restrict port numbers, side ranges, and other security groups uh, that can access your network. So those are the features of a security group. And actually, we are not going to create this security group. This I actually plan to do some bad implementation for a database. And then I was thinking of doing the correct way. But since we are running out of time, I will show you what would be a bad insecure implementation is. And then I will show you what would be the ideal secured way to create a database. So we will do this subnet group creation. We will go to the RDS service and create the subnet group that is needed to to create the database to create the cloud database. So let me so here in the services you type RDS. RDS stands for Relational Database Service in AWS. So you go to the RDS service. Now if you go to DB instances, you see I don't have any databases created here, but we are going to do the database creation later. First of all, we need to go to subnet groups. So I want to create a subnet group here. So I go to create DB subnet group. Actually, what a subnet group does is, so as it suggests, subnet group means a group of subnets, right? So now we have two subnets created, one private and one public. You can group them together. So actually, when we have two private and public sub, it doesn't make much sense, but ideally you should have like two private subnets. So the purpose of a subnet group is, in case of a database failure in one subnet, you allow the AWS to recreate the same database in the other subnet that is in the same subnet group. So database connection will still be stable in few seconds, and the users will not experience an outage. Okay, so we are going to do that. This is needed to set up a database. So we will create a name, like you can create like DB subnet. Since I have an already a subnet with this name, I create it as DB subnet group 2. So you can give some description. And now you select the VPC. So I'm going to select my second custom VPC, but you have only one custom VPC, so you can select that. And you can select the subnets. So in this VPC, what are the subnets that you want to select? So I think we created the subnets in US East 1A and US East 1B. So I'm going to select this. You need to select a minimum of 2. And now you can select those subnets from here. So now these subnets are, oh, I have somebody waiting. Okay. Uh, so so these subnets are now grouped, and we are going to click create. Now we have the subnet group created. Okay. Next, what we are going to do, we are going to create the database. Okay. So let's see what our next step is. So we are going to create the DB, but then again, I'm going to show you something. Okay. Yeah, we will have a discussion first, and then I will show you how we are going to implement the database. So this is a bad implementation for a database. Okay. So you see here, we have the VPC and we just have a subnet, and inside that we have a database. So this seems like a public subnet because the internet CIDR is opened, is exposed through port 3306, the MySQL port. So anybody in the internet can access our database via this port. This is called a bad or insecure implementation. Actually, this is how I implemented my first RDS database, because I didn't know anything about VPCs or access controls or anything. So when I first implemented this is how I too implemented that. But later, after I started working, I realized that it's very insecure, and there are very good practices related to creation of databases. So next, let's see what would be an ideal implementation. So the ideal implementation is to connect to the database via an instance called a bastion, right? A bastion is a special type of instance like a computer, but that is in the public subnet. That instance is exposed to the internet, but uh, uh, only that instance can access the database. Okay, so if somebody wants to connect to the database, they need to go through this bastion to connect to the database. So the connection from the internet to the bastion is secured because you use SSH keys to access the instance. So unless you share your SSH keys with somebody else, nobody can access the database. And also we have made this more secure, because you see here we are not allowing the internet to access the bastion, but only maybe your office network or a VPN. So that is why I wanted you to download the UIOA VPN client. So in order to connect to this bastion, you should be in your office or in your university, or you should be connected to your office VPN or your university's VPN. So in that way, it's much more secure. If you don't have connection to your VPN, you cannot access the bastion or then the database. Okay, so it's very much secure. We are never exposing our database to the internet, even via a tunnel. So let's see how we are going to implement this best practice. So these are the steps you want to do. So now you realize here, if I go back a little, so right, you should realize here now there is this bastion, there is an instance, and you have the database instance. So these should have ideally two security groups, two firewalls, right? This bastion should have should allow office network or the VPN to access it via the port 22, that is the regular SSH port. And then for the database, you need to have another security group or a firewall that lets access only the bastion via this port 3306. Okay, so you don't allow database to be accessed via 3306 to anyone in the office network, right? You don't do that. You allow only the bastion to connect to the database. So in that way, it's very much secure. So let's see. And also, I just wanted to add something. So sometimes you might hear a word called Jumpbox in the industry, especially among Australian developers. They use Jumpbox interchangeably with Bastion. So Bastion and Jumpbox, they are still the same. Okay, that is just for your knowledge. So let's see how we are going to do that. So you realize we should first have two security groups. Okay, one for the Bastion, one for the database, and then we will go on to create this Bastion, and then we will connect to the database, right?
You're muted right now.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, before thanks. Before we go on to create the security groups, I want to share something with you. So if you Google what your current public IP is, uh, there is a so you get some IP address, right? That is very random. Every time you connect to the database, every time you connect to the internet, this address could be different. So what we are going to do is we are going to get an IP address to once you are connected to your VPN. So if you are connected to your VPN, I want you to connect and get your public IP. So I can connect to my office network. So you also can connect to the University of Iowa VPN. And so since you have all this multi-factor authentication and everything enabled in your Hawk ID and all, nobody can connect to the VPN without those credentials, and then that means nobody can access our database also. Okay, so I'm connected to my VPN, my Office VPN. So I'm going to check my public IP again. So now you see it's a different address this time, right? My public IP is different, not that random one. So every time I connect to my Office VPN, I get a fixed IP address. So every time I get connected to my Office VPN, I get this uh, static public IP. So I'm going to copy that because I need to restrict access only to this IP address, right? So I'm going to create the security groups first. So I go to VPC again, VPC service. If you don't see the console and if you think I'm missing something sharing, please let me know. So I go to security groups in the VPC console, and I'm going to create a new security group. So I'm going to name this. First I'm going to create the security group for the Bastion. Since I have created security group 1 first, I'll create this as Bastion security group 2. I say here description security group Bastion. So I want this security group to be in my custom VPC. So I select the VPC, and now I can add the inbound rule. So this Bastion should have access, should be is accessible only via the SSH port, that is port 22. And you can say my IP because it will take your current public IP itself, or you can type in as well if you want to. So this is your IP, and since you have to enter CIDR, you say 32. So that means this is fixed. There are no multiple IP addresses represented by this CIDR notation. It's just one. When you say 32, you fix all the 32 digits. So it's only this IP address that can access your Bastion security group, Bastion instance. So I have that. So generally you keep outbound rules, all traffic to internet, but whether you add that or not, outbound traffic you cannot control. If you open up port 22 inbound, it will automatically be allowed outbound as well. So I'm going to create this security group. I don't want to create any tags here, so I just say create. And the next security group I want is for the database instance. So the database database security group should allow connection only from the Bastion via the port 3306. So I'm going to do that also. I'm going to create another security groups. I go to security groups here. I say create security group. And now here I say DB security group 2. Okay. So, and this also should be in the same custom VPC. And now here you can specify, okay, I want MySQL port that is 3306. So it's MySQL Aurora. This is the port you have to select. And you say custom here, and you can enter security groups. So once you enter your security group name, it will come here and you can select it and you create the security group. So now we have both the security groups we want, one for the Bastion, one for the database instance. Now we can go on to create the database, right? That should be our next step. Okay. Yeah, once you create the Bastion, you get the PEM key, and I'll show you how you can use them. So now to create the instance, you have to use the service called EC2. It stands for Elastic Computing Cloud. So you type EC2 and you go to the EC2 console. Give me 1 second. I don't have any instances running. I go to instances and I want to launch an instance. So I'm going to click on launch instances, and here there are multiple they have already pre-built images, so you don't have to create your instance from scratch. They have required OS and other mandatory packages installed, and we are basically using the Linux instances because they are cheap and they are available in the free tier, so you won't be billed for using this instance. So there is a free tier eligible one that is under Linux 2. I think we'll use the Ubuntu one.
I actually have a question.
Yeah.
I was connected to the VPN, and whenever I try to access EC2 or RDS with my VPN on, it doesn't work for me. So I have to disconnect it, and only then I can connect to EC2 and RDS services.
I didn't get what. So you mean in the console you can't select?
No, I can. So when we created security groups on VPC, I switched to my VPN, provided my IP addresses correctly.
Okay.
But as soon as I click on EC2, like you did, it kind of fails for me. It just keeps on loading. So does that have something to do with the way that I have set up my IAM user?
I don't think that should be an issue. Did anybody else? Yeah, somebody has. Yeah, you had asked that question, right?
Yeah, I don't think it.
Is anyone else?
Never mind, I can work on it later. We can move ahead with the class.
Yeah, we will. Yeah. For the time being, you disconnect and you can follow it, right?
Sure.
Yeah, we will see after we finish what we are supposed to do today. We will see to troubleshoot. I don't think it should be a much bigger issue. Okay, so here I'm going to use one of these Ubuntu instances that are free tier eligible ones. So we will use some. Yeah, they seem to be like we will use this 20.04.1. That is the latest one. That is like OS is much new latest OS. So we will select this instance and so this is the instance type that we can use, T2 micro, that is free tier, that is in the free tier. So you won't be billed if you leave your connections request in a particular range. Okay, that is the understanding of free tier, but if you exceed those free tier ranges, you will still be billed. Okay. Right.
Why are we using Ubuntu for as a EC2 machine?
We can use is Ubuntu or Linux or whatever, any type, even Mac if you want to, but only Linux and Ubuntu's are in the free tier.
Yeah.
So that's why we are using, and it's important for you to learn some of these Linux commands as well. So, and it's good to learn those stuff because we most of us are familiar with Windows and Mac, right? But we hardly use terminal OSs, so it's good to get to know that, and that is one expectation of the industry as well, your familiarity with Linux and Unix. So I'm going to use that. So even if even if you are currently using Windows, you can still connect to this Linux or the Ubuntu one. That's not an issue. That you will be connecting to this instance that is in the cloud. So via the MySQL workbench. So even if you are still using Mac or Windows in your local machine, you can still connect to these instances, right? Okay, so we will leave this T2 micro, and now here we want just one instance. So this spot instance. So this is a kind of related to costing. So spot instances are like they are very cheap. compared to reserved instances. Reserved instances means you have that instance as long as you terminate that, but spot instances are like you give them a price. Okay, I don't want to spend more than $4 per week. Okay, for an instance. So as long as now on support spot instances means their price changes. So if as long as that instance price is less than what you said, what you requested, you will have the instance. But when due to high demand or anything, the instance price goes up, you will be given like 2-minute notice and your instance will be terminated. So if you have very critical systems, you should never run them on spot instances. But if there are some jobs that you just want to run in like few minutes, and then you don't care whether the instance stays or not, you can use the spot instances. They are really cheap. I think they are like 1/5 of the regular reserved instance price. So they are really cheap, but you have to take the risk. So here you select the network, the custom VPC, and you can select the subnet. So I'm going to select, so the bastion should be in the public. So I select the public subnet. Auto assign public IP, yes. So I'm going to use that. I'm going to enable that for the, I think I have enabled that for the subnet as well, but currently I'm going to use that as enable. So it's easy. I don't want to double check that. I can directly connect to that through my MySQL workbench. So these placement groups, they are kind of grouping instances in a group. So you can then run your applications in a placement group, that kind of thing. So we are not going to cover all of those detailed things. And you can assign a role if you want to, like IAM role. We will learn about roles maybe end of this workshop or next workshop. So shutdown behavior. So when you want to shut down, you say whether you want to stop or terminate. Stop means after some time you can start that, but terminate, if you terminate, you cannot restart the instance. So we keep that as stop. Others, some important things I'll highlight here, not everything, but tenancy means shared, run a shared hardware instance. So what do you mean by that? You can have dedicated or dedicated host. So shared means now you are using this instance. So after you shut down, somebody else might use this instance. So that is the idea of shared. So but if you use dedicated, after you shut down, even nobody else will use that. But if you use dedicated, we will go out of the free tier and we will be charged higher charges. So we want to avoid that. So we use the shared tenancy. And this yeah, so we will get a like network interface, because this is accessible via the internet. So we will leave this as default. I will just highlight some important things here. Now this user data is important, right? If you want to run certain things when you start the instance, you can mention them here. So for instance, let's say you want to start Tomcat web server. As soon as the instance starts up, you can enter those commands here. Okay, so we will do that when we do the web hosting. But for the Bastion, you don't want to run any initial scripts, so we will leave that as empty. Now this instance is just a bare instance, and if so, it has a root volume and it has just 8 GB memory, 8 GB storage. The size means the not the permanent storage. That is it's the permanent storage actually, the SSD or whatever the volume, but not the RAM. So if you want to add extra storage, you can add them here, but we don't want any of that. And the tagging is, as I told you, for uh, identification purposes and billing purposes. We don't want any of that. Now we get to configure the security group. Now, since we have already created a security group, we can assign that security group to this instance. So I'm going to assign this Bastion security group 2 to this instance. So it shows me what are the rules that I have in for this security group. I say review and launch. Now when you click launch, you will get a PEM. You have to create a SSH key pair. So I'm going to create a new key pair, and I can give a name to that, Bastion 2 key pair. And I'm going to download that. This is required to connect to your Bastion in the future, and that is required to connect to your database via the MySQL also. So I'm getting that. I downloaded that PEM file. Now I'm going to launch the instance. So the instance will come up in few seconds, and you see its status is still pending. In few seconds it should be ready. And now we have the instance ready, and we are going to create the database now. Okay, so this instance will come up. Okay, now it's running. So we go back to the RDS service. So I go here and I'm going to create a new instance now. So I go to create database. Now we have the subnet groups created already, so we can go ahead and use that. I go to create database and I say standard create. Yeah, I'll use the standard one, and I want to use MySQL. And we will use this latest, or kind of quite latest one, not the very latest, because sometimes these very latest one have issues. So I want to use this free tier here. I don't want to go for production or dev test. They will be expensive. And I give a name here. So Cloud Computing Workshop DB2. And this is going to be my username for the database. And I can specify a password here. So you type a password that you can easily remember, but remember here there are certain restrictions, can't contain these characters. So you enter the password that you remember, and here also this is the one that is allowed us to use because we selected free tier here. So only this instance. So as you can see, this is like in EC2 also we used the T2 micro or T3 micro, I can't remember. But so database also, they have instance sizes. So based on your requirements, you can go for larger instance type. But since we are just running this in free tier, we will use this one. And storage, this is the storage that you want to use for the database. So just keep them as default. And you don't want to go for multi-AC deployment because this is free tier. You just want to database in just one subnet, one availability zone. You don't want to go for other availability zones. Now you select here. You should not use the default VPC. You should use your custom VPC. And I have created the subnet group for that, the subnet group 2. So whatever the subnet group you created, you select it here. So you say you don't want to give public access. And security group, you say this database security group. So if you want, you can assign multiple security groups for a, so if you want like several, if you want to allow ports or CIDR ranges from different security groups, you can assign different security groups, but we are going to use only one. So we will create this database in, where was our public, let me see. So our private subnet was in, our private subnet was in US East 1A. So I'm going to US East 1A. Yeah, this is the port number. You keep as that this as password authentication, that is fine. And a default master database. We will give a name ccwdb. So this is going to be our initial schema of the database, and the parameter group you can select. You can use the default parameter group. So what do you mean by a parameter group is, you know, when you install MySQL server in your local machine, you can configure a file called my.conf file that specifies certain configurations for your MySQL database. So similarly, you can specify some configurations for your cloud database as well, but we are going to use this default configuration from this default parameter group. And these option groups are also like something similar to that. So we are going to use the default ones. We don't want to change any of that. And yeah, so this shows here free tier limitations are presented for you to just to know.
Can you show the settings one more time before we create it?
Okay, right. So I'll start from the top. Standard, you select MySQL. Here you select this version of MySQL and you select free tier. And here you give a name to the instance. And you leave the username as admin and you specify password 2 times. And you select here, it's already selected, dbt2 micro. And these all default selections. And here you select your custom VPC and subnet group that you created. Select no for the public access, and you select the security group from here. And if generally default is selected, you should remove it, right? You should allow only the, so if you click on this twice, this will also go out. So we want only that security group. And this is your private subnet, availability zone of your private subnet, so you will leave that here. And additional configuration was the port. Yeah, in additional configuration, you specify the database name, initial schema name, and these are default values. Right. Okay. Yeah, that's all the custom settings that we changed, and I'm going to create the database now. So starting up the database might take some time. So we can now uh, try to connect with MySQL Workbench. I think that should be the next step. Yeah. Okay, so if you have installed MySQL Workbench, that's still creating. So as I told you now, with the MySQL Workbench, we are going to first connect to the Bastion. Then from Bastion, we are going to connect to the database. So let me show how we are going to do that. So this is my MySQL Workbench initial screen. So I'm going to create a new connection. You see my MySQL Workbench screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So here, this is kind of the basic connection that you have, standard TCP/IP. So if you want to directly connect to the database, this option you have to select. So if you use that insecure implementation, you can use that, but we want to use this standard TCP/IP over SSH, that option, and we will give a name. Okay, so WDB2 connection, right? So this SSH host name is going to be your Bastion host. So you have to get that from your EC2 console. So we will go back to EC2 console. And here you have your Bastion, or you can rename that so it's nice. Bastion 2. Okay, it's nice to see that. So here, now you see here, you have a public IPv4 address, DNS address, or the IP address. You can select either of them, right? I'm going to select the IPv4 address. So I click on this and it's copied. And I'm going to my MySQL Workbench. Oops, sorry. Right. So here I leave the port 22 and I enter only the IP address here. And username, since we created an Ubuntu machine, its username is generally Ubuntu, right? If you created a Linux one, it will be like EC2-user. So you leave the username, and now here you specify the key file. So I click on this, and I downloaded. Where is my key? Search here. Bastion2 key pair. Okay, so this is my PEM file that I downloaded. I keep that. Now I specify MySQL hostname that I have to take from my RDS instance. I hope now it is ready. Okay, status still says backing up. That's fine. We want just the endpoint of the database, so we are going to get that. So you see here endpoint. So I'm going to copy that. That is going to be my MySQL hostname. Okay, I copy that and I go to the Workbench again and I paste it here. Port it 3306 and is the username for the database. And
Where
now
did you find the host name for that?
for the database,
Yeah.
Yeah, so you go to once you're in the database dashboard, you click on the instance that you just created, and in this connectivity and security, you can get the endpoint.
Okay.
Okay, so now I have that here. Now I just want to test my connection, and when I ask to test the connection, it will ask me for the password that I gave. But yeah, we'll have to wait because the instance is still backing up. Right, we'll wait until it comes to the ready state. Okay, now it's available. Now we should be able to connect. Let's see. Okay. I'm going to check the security groups whether I have everything properly. DB security group. Let's see. Right. Okay, it has access to Bastion security group, and I'm going to check the Bastion security group. Okay.
I have one question.
Yeah.
So in our security group, we used MySQL Aurora to do it, but when we created the database, we used SQL, not MySQL Aurora. Is that an issue?
I didn't. Could you please repeat the question?
So if you go back to our security group that we created,
Right, the port. I see. Yeah, the
Right.
MySQL Aurora. They use the same port actually.
yeah,
So the
To-
Aurora database has two flavors. One is the MySQL, one is the PostgreSQL. So if you use PostgreSQL, it's I think 5432 or something. But if you use MySQL, it will be 3306. So whether you use default MySQL or Aurora MySQL, it will still be 3306. And
okay.
if you use default PostgreSQL or Aurora PostgreSQL, it will be that 5432 port. Okay, the port numbers are still the same. I think the mistake is we should have specified. Can you remember that somewhere we specified as not public? I think that is where we made the mistake. I'm sorry. We'll just we can delete this one and get a new one. This database we are going to delete. Okay. And yeah, so this I can use this one to teach you some other thing. So once you try to delete that, it asks you to create final snapshot. So you won't accidentally delete the database without creating a snapshot. So in case you delete a database, if you have the snapshot, you can always restore whatever the data that you had to another instance. And also remember, even though it's a snapshot, you will still be charged. Okay, I remember when I was using the free tier, I removed all my instances and databases, and I was still being billed like $1 or $2 every month. And then I realized that it was these snapshots that I created, that was charging me. So you don't need any snapshot because we don't have any data. So I don't want a snapshot. I just say delete me here. Now I can, then I have to acknowledge that I can't recover anything after the deletion. And I say delete. So we will recreate a database. Sorry guys, I just forgot to specify that. So I'm going to create a database with that public thing, but it doesn't mean it's public. It's just, it allows it, yeah, it creates the connection via the internet gateway to be able to connect to the outside. So if we don't specify that, we can't connect to the database from this workbench. So the same parameters, right? If you want to follow me, you can still do standard MySQL, this version, default one, free tier. We can use the same instance name, same password, everything. Only that public option you have to select. Default size. And where is that? Okay, so first VPC, subnet group. Yeah, this is one you have to select yes. And you specify this security group and remove the default one. UST1A. Here you specify the port, you have a port selected. And there's another one. So this is going to be your default schema. Parameter groups, option groups, default. Okay. Yeah. That's all we have to customize, and we should create a new database here. Okay, so it's still in existence, so I will rename it like DB2, then DB1, because the other one is still being deleted. Okay, now this one is still being created. I can still go inside. No, endpoint is still not there. As soon as endpoint appears, we can paste it there. But where did we specify the security code? Yeah, DB security group 2 selected. Okay, so yeah.
So basically, they're using our EC2 to SSH into a database, right?
Yes.
And our EC2 is our bastion.
Yes, correct.
Correct. All right.
So
And we can also do that on our own terminals, or no?
yeah, you can.
We can SSH into the EC2 using our own terminals.
Yes, you can. Yeah, we will do that. So yeah, already past the time, but I was thinking let me see what I have next in my slides. Yeah. So the next we have to do is the web hosting. So we will next week create another EC2 as our web server, and we will SSH into that. Okay, and we will make it a Apache server or the Tomcat server, and we will create an index file, and we will write code to connect to this database table, and get information from there. All those things we can do next time. And so the plan for next week is to create the EC2 instance and access the database from there for our web page. Actually, our web page will access the database and display information, and also we will use the storage buckets like S3, and we will get objects or the images from there and display on our web page as well. So that is going to be our plan for next week. And let's see if this instance is ready now. It's still being created. Yeah. As soon as this is ready, we can just connect to the database via MySQL Workbench and then create a table. So we can use that particular table next week when we do the web hosting. So do you guys have any questions until the database comes up that you want to clarify? So only one person had the connection issue, right, to the VPN. Others were able to connect without any issues. Let's see if MySQL work. If you are allowed to connect to the database via MySQL Workbench, if so, it shouldn't be an issue. But the next thing that you can do is, for the Bastion security group, you can open the Bastion security group to the internet, right? So you are not restricting access only to the University of Iowa VPN, but to the entire internet. The entire internet can connect to the Bastion, but nobody has the PEM key, so it's impossible. And then Bastion can connect to the database. That is one other thing you can do to overcome that issue. Okay, now we have the endpoint ready. We are going to use that in our work, my host name. So I gave the same password as earlier. So, okay, I still haven't entered the password. So others are still same. I say test connection. It should prompt me for the password. Is this 54? Let's say this. Oh, I see. I see. I'm connected to my VPN. That's true. Let's see if we have Bastion properly set up. Bastion 2. It's security group. It's so Bastion security group. Yeah, I allow port 22. Correct. Database security group. And so for the RDS, I have assigned a security group as well. I have the also attached to that. It's ready. I don't know why it's not. Let me try one thing. I'm not sure if that is the one causing the issue. I just want to try something. let's try to SSH into the Bastion if that's possible. So if you want to, I can just teach you if you want to SSH into Bastion, how you can do that. You can select your Bastion here, and you can select this connect here, and if you go to SSH client, you can get, this is the command, this is the way you are going to connect to this Bastion. Okay, this is the command to use. So I'm going to use that, but my pen key is in a different location, so I have to specify it here. So we have an issue connecting to our Bastion. I think that is why it's not. That is why the MySQL workbench is also rejecting. Let's see. Shouldn't take this long. It should straight away. Port 22. Let's see if I open up port 22. Internet will work. Nothing. Okay, so the internet can access my Bastion now. Let's see. Sure. Well, let me try something. Yeah, I will. I don't know if this solves the thing. I have to set change some other thing. There's another thing called enable DNS edit resolution. That is selected. Yeah, we will stop here and we'll see. I'll just troubleshoot this during the week, and we will start from here. It shouldn't take that long, this issue to resolve. Yeah, we'll stop here for today, and I'll if I figure out the issue, I'll mail you when I send you the recordings. So we'll stop here for today and continue from there next week. So we have to do the web hosting and accessing database and the cloud storage. Okay, we'll stop here and continue from there. If you do have any other questions, feel free to ask anything that you want to know about the workshop or any matter. I have a few minutes.
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, no problem.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Harsha.
Yeah, no problem, Santosh.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for coming.